I'm going to turn it over to a guest speaker we've got here today. Some of you maybe know John Parrish here with Redox. So just kind of give a little insight into the relationship between Redox and NutriDrip. Redox is a company that we've kind of been doing the tango with here for a couple of years now, I guess, if you will. They've got a lot of interesting products. We've learned a lot from Darren Moon and the team there. And realistically, as we kind of analyze, who do we want to be aligned with and what types of things do we want to help bring to the market, Redox is the type of company because they're very farmer focused, they're very scientific based, and they're very data driven. That's the type of companies we want to align with. And John is based just down the road out of Holdridge as a boots on the ground support for our team, but more importantly for the growers. So I'm going to let John talk a little bit about Redox, who you guys are, and specifically about the RDX-N product.
Yeah, John. Well, first I want to thank NutriDrip for having me out, and Nathan, and for what we've been able to work together on so far. I'll tell you guys, don't fall asleep now. It's the afternoon after lunch. I don't have a picture of my family, but I was up at 3:30 a.m. with a 1-year-old. So it was an early morning, and I'm ready for a nap. So yeah, today we'll kind of cover a little bit about what Redox is. It's been a very good setup by the Kurt and Nathan getting into this about some of the principles we talk about. So really fascinating, a lot of good information this morning. And with that, we'll kind of get started if what slides they have. So first and foremost, Redox offers biostimulants paired with nutrients. So it's a substance or a product that's going to actually tell that plant to do something, but it's paired with some nutrients to actually make that response happen. So the biostimulant is that piece that's telling the plant to make a response that's focused on nutrient efficiency, stress management, or fruit quality or seed quality. So in that sense, while we can push yield, we're really looking at how can we become more efficient. Right? Where can we find the balance? What I have behind me, really what I would point out was this bottom piece. Those are the biostimulants that we have in the products. So a lot of botanical extracts, humics, fulvics, that type of stuff, alginates, protein hydrolysates. Those are some of them that we're really pulling forward. You guys any questions about biostimulants right from the get-go? One piece that's in a biostimulant, we don't offer live microbials yet, but a microbial product is considered a biostimulant, but not all biostimulants are obviously microbes. Where does that lead us? So today we've heard about redox, we've heard about energy balance, we've heard about nutrient balance. I'm going to tell you they're all linked together, they all play a role. What I have up here on the slide is the photosynthesis process, getting into how do we make proteins, right? It's simplified, and it's basically a continuing circle, right? So as we go through that, why I think this is important to mention is we heard about redox potential earlier, and that's the ability. So redox means the ability to give or take energy, to give or take an electron. What's the most abundant redox reaction? I'm going to call it the most abundant, more than likely. Photosynthesis. It's the start of a redox reaction that generates a charge, generates energy, right? So we're taking water, we're taking carbon dioxide, we're taking sunlight energy, and we're making that into two different charges, right? It comes out to be oxygen and electrons and all that stuff. And that's how we get this process started. That's how that plant can actually start to move nutrients, right? That's how it gets its energy. So we go through that, and I will mention there's going to be two types of scenarios. That plant can do that without biostimulants. It can do this process without biostimulants, right? That's the survive function. That's what it has to do to survive, to reproduce. Where biostimulants come in is we open up more pathways. Those pathways are called metabolic pathways, so the ability to break down, say, nitrogen and make a different protein, make a different amino acid, and use it in something else, right? So we can open up more of those to get our end result, and that's where some of that efficiency comes. Really what it is is energy balance. Why am I so heavy on energy right now? When you guys think about fertilizer, what do you talk about? When I show this slide, what's up there that we overlook very often? I heard Nathan talk about it, I think I heard Kurt talk about it today. All except for 2 of these have some sort of charge with it. Again, that's what the plant recognizes. The plant doesn't recognize potassium per se, right? It doesn't recognize copper. It recognizes a charge. When I talk about redox, when I talk about RAM, so water products, what we call it RAM in it, what are we trying to do? We're trying to balance that charge so that plant can bring in the nutrients that it needs, right? What really happens there, 80% of our negative charge is brought up by nitrogen. And I guess I didn't preface this. We're going to talk heavily on nitrogen in one product specifically today. We do have a whole host of others, but that's where we're going to focus. So 80% of our charge in a plant, that negative ionic charge, is from nitrogen. Does anybody know why? I mentioned it earlier, a little bit kind of getting into it. The first reason I think why is we've selected those plants to take up nitrogen. We've said, hey, we're going to breed this plant to take up nitrogen. That's our selection process, right? One, that made the bigger, greener, darker plant, right? 2, it probably brought more yield to a sense. What it also brought was a stress, an excess stress, a high nitrate stress, right? So that nitrate is being stored in those leaves, and that's going to bring that negative ion. What does it have to do to bring in another negative ion? It basically has to make that plant positive. How are you going to outcompete all that nitrate in there? And that's where that stress comes in. It's basically storing all that nitrate. Again, we get a big dark green flush, our leaves get larger, but again, it's just nitrate. We talked about earlier, nitrogen is important in the chlorophyll process. It is, but it's got to be converted. So just the storage of nitrate, the measure of nitrate on a tissue sample isn't the measure of an end product, isn't the measure of a yield. It's the measure of the nitrate concentration. And once you get over a sufficiency level, you may not actually influence the yield. So that's something to think about. Is where is your sufficiency level? Where is that going to cap you at? What Redox does to help balance that is we bring in redox active molecules, right? Again, we didn't create the redox term, we're just using it. What that does is takes, again, that gradient from being such negatively charged, and we can actually minimize that. So instead of working in such a large fluctuation, now we're working in a smaller tunnel. So the amount of energy, that energy conservation, is better because we're not fluctuating so high to bring in the nutrients we need. And that's where we see that boost, that's where we see that yield, or that health of that plant improve, and then just with that, the balance of the nutrients in there. Any questions so far? Any thoughts? I've talked a lot over the last few weeks, so if I'm missing something, guys, let me know if there's any questions back there. So again, the big takeaway here is all of our fertilizers come with a charge. Who talks about that? Prior to coming to Redox, prior to listening to the NutriDrip, I haven't heard of a single person. So maybe Kevin, Kevin with his magnets, but really on the scope of it, I haven't heard of a whole bunch actually get into that, right? Okay, I'm gonna get the product here in a little bit. I don't have very many slides, guys, so if there's questions, please speak up. But when we're looking at products, when Darren's building these products out, they have to meet 5 criteria. They have to move through the soil into the plant, or into the plant from a foliar application. They have to be able to move. Second, they have to be able to get into that plant. Thirdly, they got to translocate, so again, a movement piece. When I say metabolize, every component of that product, Darren wants to be able to be used by that plant. So now we're not wasting excess energy storing something that's not used. We're not trying to kick it out of the plant. We're not trying to balance what that might bring with it. We're actually trying to use everything that we're putting in there. And then that leads us to utilization. Can we become more efficient? Can we utilize it better? So that's what it takes to get all of our products. Darren looks through that, and he's got his process, and that's what it makes. We're going to jump into nitrogen. And I think this, I really like this slide, even though it says what is RDX-N is not. One, it's not a stabilizer. It's not going to stabilize nitrogen, in a sense. Two, it's not going to fix nitrogen. They're not a microbe. We're not going to go out there and just generate nitrogen in the atmosphere. The secondary effects of RDX-N could do this, but the primary response of RDX-N is not to do. So what RDX-N is helping us achieve is basically the management of an excess of nitrate. We heard it's better to split nitrogen through the season. You're not storing so much nitrate at that time. You're not getting over that threshold where that plant has to actually throw so much energy into creating storage facilities for that nitrate, right? RDX-N basically is telling that plant it's a genetic expression to metabolize the nitrogen. So instead of just running through our survive process, RDX-N is opening up different metabolic pathways. And I'm not describing any specific one because there's thousands. Right? So there's thousands of them that we can get through that end up giving us a different response, end up giving us a different protein that we can actually utilize in the process. So again, it's to fight that excess nitrate that's stored in the plant. No questions yet? We've got a pretty succinct explanation of it, Nathan. Do they need to go deeper? When do you apply it? No one's asked what's in it. Okay, so we'll cover when do you apply it. Honestly, whenever you're going to put out nitrogen, and the highest load of nitrogen is the best opportunity. So if you're putting on anhydrous, I don't think probably anybody in here probably is, that planting would be the best opportunity. If you're going to put on a large amount, say over 80 pounds, 100 pounds in season, right then and there would be the best opportunity to have RDX-N in the tank, right? If you're not doing any of those, at planting is our best option with RDX-N to give that plant the quickest response, right? So we're going to start from the beginning, have that better balance.
John, just for the sake of clarity on that, when we talk about at planting versus in-season side dress, so you're still saying I prefer the product in an in-season side dress if we're putting on 80 plus pounds versus in furrow, that we're going to see better response, if you will, to that nitrate storage.
There's one caveat: if that in-season is before or prior, go with that at planting application, even though there'd hardly be any difference, right? But if you're going to split that out and put it on, say after V6, V8, and it's over 80 pounds in one shot, I would definitely go with that 80 pounds. And the reason is, the plant, RDX-N would survive through that, and it would function through that, but that nitrate, again, that plant wants to pull it in. It may come to a point where that nitrate concentration is too high even for that plant to metabolize at that point. So coming in with the product either a second time or at that time to boost that is the response, right? So we could overstimulate the plant too much with too much nitrogen to essentially hide the effects here.
What about the guys putting anhydrous on the fall?
It works very well right at planting.
In the fall, November?
Well, no, RDX-N in furrow with the anhydrous, whether it's fall or spring. We've actually seen the best responses with the anhydrous, normally because they put on such a large amount. Does that make sense? And I know that's the ammoniacal form, but most of the time when it's taken up, it is already converted to nitrate. Right? So it goes through that process and kills some of those microbes right off the bat. But to store it in the soil, it has to be stored as nitrate, right? That's the CUC, the cation exchange capacity, right? I said that wrong. The ammoniacal form would stay in the soil better, but it does get converted just because of the microbes that are there. So, but normally they're doing a higher rate of anhydrous, right? So that's overloading the plant in that system, and that's where we see that biggest response. Putting RDX-N in the furrow.
What about if I'm not running anything in furrow?
Don't foliar apply it just yet. We're working on that. But if you're not running anything in furrow, I would say go on with probably your first nitrogen application or your largest.
Can I go 2x2?
You can, yes. Yep. We want to get this product to the soil. Again, the goal of getting these products out is so they move through the soil, they'll move with water, right? And they'll be able to be absorbed by that plant. RDX-N is one of the products that we have not got foliar yet because of phytotoxicity, but we're working on that case. You could chemicate it.
So when you say in furrow, I think about starter fertilizer at planting time.
Yeah.
And if you had your choice, would you put it in starter fertilizer at planting time, or would you put it on the lay-by application when the corn is a foot tall?
My first question would be is when you put the most nitrogen down, how much nitrogen, what's your nitrogen applications look like? If you're gonna have about 100 pounds at plant or prior to plant, I would target that unless you're coming in season with a higher level of nitrogen at one time. That makes sense?
Well, you're only putting on 3 to 5 gallons of starter fertilizer in furrow.
Yeah. Have you applied more nitrogen prior to that? Whether it's through like a herbicide carrier, right? Did you put 20 gallon in there? So if that's the case, I would look at the nitrogen program, not necessarily what you're just putting in furrow, if that makes sense. So, but it works best if we're seeing that high nitrogen load, that plant has that access to it, that's where we see the biggest response. Manure applications generally happen in the spring or in the fall. We get tremendous results when guys are applying manure, and we put RDX-N in furrow. But it's all about how much nitrogen is in that system, and how can we overcome basically that excess. Again, it's excess of nitrogen, not the low side of nitrogen.
So if you put an inhibitor on, would you still put the inhibitor on? Or not?
Yeah, you can. Like I would have to get into the whole which inhibitor it is, what's it actually trying to do.
DCD.
What's that?
DCD is all we use.
Yeah. So it wouldn't have RDX-N, and that would not have like antagonism. Again, it would be if that inhibitor would hold back that nitrogen conversion too much. But I don't. From what I know about inhibitors, they're relatively short-lived in an active soil. So I wouldn't be worried about it at all. So. Got some results, but we didn't cover what the product actually is, right? So I said a biostimulant piece. It's also got a potassium and a calcium, right? And then it's got some glucose and glucose. So all of that, the biostimulant is actually a plant extract pulled out of basically waste products from trees. So they were able to pull that out, figure out how to put that in there. I mentioned potassium and calcium for a specific reason. I think earlier we were talking about balances or bicarbonates, the lack of calcium in season because of irrigation water. What I firmly believe right now is all biostimulants work if they have the right nutritional balance, if that plant has the right balance, right? They all work, otherwise they wouldn't be a problem. Why we add potassium and calcium is because if your crop can't bring that in, can't actually utilize those nutrients for what it's for, the biostimulant won't function, right? So having those tied together plays an important role into how these all end up getting us our efficiency. RDX-N again is focused at the nitrogen efficiency. We're targeting reducing 25% to 50% nitrogen, pulling back 25 to 50% of what's already being applied. That's our goal. And no one's wanting to do that, are they? It kind of leads you to think, where is our nutrient limitation there because we're not applying enough, or is it more so there's an imbalance and it's ending up costing the plant energy to make that better? We've seen results where we've cut more than that than actually produced. We've cut 80% on a couple fields. So there are savings there, there are efficiencies there. I'm not gonna tell everybody to go out and do that right off the bat, but there's a start, there's a way we can get better. This is a summary of our trials from last year, I believe the year prior. This one is with no reduction. I believe there's about 20 trials in this. Did I send that to you, Nathan? I think there's about 20 there. Overall, we saw the yield boost side of it, even though we're looking for a yield maintenance with a reduction. So there is upside, there is efficiency in just balancing that charge of the plant to gradient that plant's using to get nutrients in there. Using a product like RDX-N, maintaining your yield. Right, it's maintaining your nitrogen and improving your yields. In this case, what I'd like to point out is, even though they didn't reduce, we had a better NUE just because we yielded more, right? That's one side of the puzzle we don't think about. Everybody should know about it, but we don't think about it. Where I really think we actually had the better results would be where we actually reduced. I think there were about 17 trials in this one. Honestly, if you look at the yield, this is a higher yielding environment already. These growers were more efficient to start with. They pulled back an average of 30 pounds per acre and still saw a better return, even though they were more efficient than the prior group. So if that's not proving that we can actually pull back some nitrogen, save some money, and still bring in some yield and some benefit, I don't know what else I got to show you. That's all I had, guys. Brief to the point. Any questions, comments, thoughts?
Trial, just a 1 year trial, or is it a multiple year trial? You already compared soil test with that, so you have averages, make sure they're not mining, especially on nitrogen.
I don't have soil tests with them. That is something, so I came on last summer, and that's something I pushed them to do. I said everything's got to have a soil test, but we don't know what we did, right? Interesting, you said mining the nitrogen out of it. I've got conflicting views on that aspect right now, and I'm trying to learn more. It's always been my understanding prior to this, and I guess my background is university research and did consulting, and then I got into the biological and biostimulant piece of it. Nitrogen doesn't really store in the soil that well. To that point, though, I've heard about legacy nitrogen now, and I'm not sure what to think or what to believe. I just think that's more understanding to do there. I don't know that we're going to mine our soils. On the nitrogen piece, I've been across quite a few farms. Everybody does it different. We all hit the same goal, right? The guys that are way more efficient, they're not complaining about this was a train wreck every other year, right? The guys that are over applying, maybe, they're not saying anything either, right? Everybody's happy with their program per se. But why can that difference bring us the same goal? I think that's where I would question you on, like, are we actually mining our soils?
The reason I worded the way I did,
Yeah.
John, I guess we know each other well enough that,
Yeah.
you know, is in the words of to quote Ray Ward, you know, if you want to save money on your inputs, the easiest way, you know, for at least 1 year is to just go out there and not apply any nitrogen. You're going to have at least, you know, 2/3 or 3/4 of your yield, because most of us have that much excess nitrogen in our soil. But it's year 2, year 3 beyond, you know, is where you're going to see significant yield reduction, where you, once again, in this words not mine, you mine all the excess nitrogen out of the soil. You know, now you're at, you know, back down to levels where you need to apply the nitrogen. That's why I was asking, year over year with reduction, you know, 1 year sample with reduction of nitrogen, you know, you know, does not necessarily trend make.
Yeah, no, these are 2 years worth of data. They're not necessarily over the same acre, same patch. Yeah, it's a nitrogen piece. I'm kind of torn between, are we going to mine it or are we not? I don't really answer that right now. I don't believe we are. I think as I get further into this, and it was mentioned a couple times earlier, is as what I'm finding out, it's more about a balance, right? Calcium is one of those that nobody looks at because the part per million is so high. I've got 3,000 parts per million, I've got 4,000 parts per million. How much is actually available? And I'll tell you what, there's some fields where you might have 4,000, 5,000 parts per million, and it's none. Calcium plays a really important role in nitrogen efficiency, nitrogen use. On those fields, a product like this, or any product that's actually going to boost the availability of calcium is going to actually help you out, right? So I think it's more about a balance compared to what we've been taught to believe. If that makes sense. So, any questions, thoughts, comments? You guys can tell me I'm crazy.
You're crazy.
Yeah, I've heard it before, but yeah, I don't know. It's interesting. I didn't get a lot to learn yet in the field of agronomy. That rapid soil test, I would highly recommend taking a look at that. Those are very fascinating. So,
Thanks, John.